Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to be diving deep into something that every Marine needs to know, like the back of their hand, and that's MCDP 8, the Marine Corps Doctrine on Information. You got all those readings out there, we know. So we're here to really help you pull out the important stuff, the stuff that's going to make you the most effective Marine you can be when it comes to information warfare.
You know, it's not just about knowing which buttons to press or which systems to hack.
Right.
It's about really understanding the core of it all, the power of information itself, right?
Yeah.
How information can shape battles, perceptions, even the will to fight.
MCDP 8 comes right out the gate and says that information is power,
Yeah.
just like economic or military might.
And what I find so fascinating about this is that the document doesn't waste any time. It goes right to the strategic level and says, look, information, it's right up there with things like having a strong economy or a powerful military.
Yep.
The Marine Corps is basically saying, hey, information, that's a force multiplier. It's a key element of national power.
So we're not just talking about battlefield comms anymore.
No, we're not just talking about, can you call for fire or can you talk to your buddy on the radio?
Right.
We're talking about things that are so much bigger than that. We're talking about influencing entire populations, shaping the narrative on a global scale. We're talking about potentially undermining an enemy's will to fight, maybe even before the first shot is fired.
Right.
Think about how countries use information to build alliances or to deter aggression or to achieve those political goals they have. It's a totally different kind of battlefield.
Definitely a different kind of battlefield. MCDP 8 also talks about how information can actually take those things we always talk about with war, the ambiguity, the uncertainty, the complexity, and kind of
Amplify them.
amplify them.
Right, all those elements of fog of war that just make things so unpredictable.
Yeah.
But information warfare, it brings a whole new layer of fog to the fight, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
It's like adding smoke to the fog. Just picture this. You're a Marine, you're out on patrol. All of a sudden, your comms go down.
Oh, that's not.
Your GPS is leading you astray, giving you false readings. You're getting conflicting orders, conflicting intel from higher headquarters. That's the kind of chaos
Yeah.
that information warfare can create. It can take an already chaotic situation and just dial it up to 11, which, when used correctly, can give you a huge advantage.
It makes sense. So information is this weapon. But how does MCDP 8 say we as Marines actually gain an advantage with it?
Well, the document, it lays out 3 key advantages that they call information advantages: systems overmatch, the prevailing narrative, and force resiliency.
So systems overmatch, that sounds a lot like having the best tech, being able to disrupt the enemy's communication, right?
It's definitely part of it, but it's more than just having the newest gadgets or the shiniest toys. It's about really understanding how much the enemy relies on their information systems and using that knowledge to disrupt their ability to operate effectively, to make decisions. Think about how dependent modern militaries are today on all these networks for just about everything: targeting, logistics, intelligence, even basic communication between units. If you can disrupt those systems, you can really gain a decisive edge on the battlefield.
So we're not just talking about jamming their radio, we're talking about shutting down their entire command structure.
Exactly. Now, let's move on to this prevailing narrative.
Now this one to me seems really interesting.
Oh, yeah.
This seems like it's not just about hardware or systems. This seems like psychology almost.
It really is. Think of it this way. Whoever tells the most believable story, the story that resonates, that's who wins the hearts and minds. That can sway public opinion. It can influence which countries support which side. It can even impact the decisions of your allies and your enemies. A really strong narrative. It can really sap an enemy's morale, erode their support, and ultimately make it that much harder for them to fight.
So it's not just about, writing press releases or putting out propaganda. This is about understanding how information shapes perceptions and beliefs.
Absolutely. Think about how Ukraine has used social media to tell their story to the entire world during this conflict with Russia.
Yeah.
They've been incredibly effective at shaping the global narrative, getting support from other countries, and really undermining Russia's attempts to justify what they're doing. That's a perfect example of information warfare in action.
That's a really good point. Okay, and the final advantage MCDP 8 talks about is force resiliency.
All right.
What's that even mean?
This is about being tough, not just physically tough, but mentally tough. Think of it as like information armor. It's about being able to withstand those enemy attempts to manipulate you, to spread lies and disinformation, to just break your morale.
So is it like mental OPSE? like being able to spot a fake news story or a propaganda campaign.
It's definitely a part of it, but it also means building a culture of trust and open communication within your unit, because when you trust your leaders, when you trust the Marines next to you, you're a lot less likely to be swayed by enemy propaganda. You're going to be more likely to rely on the information that you're getting through your chain of command.
That makes sense. So you're basically creating a kind of information immune system within the unit.
Exactly. You're making your force more resistant to those informational viruses that the enemy is trying to spread.
Interesting. Okay, so we've been breaking down these three information advantages, systems overmatch, prevailing narrative, force resiliency. Those are like the goals of information warfare, right?
They are.
But how do we actually use information to achieve them?
Yeah.
Like, how do we make this happen?
Well, that's where MCDP 8 gets into the nitty-gritty and lays out these four, what they call key functions of information: generate, preserve, deny, and project.
Okay, let's break those down one by one. First, generate. What does it mean to generate information?
Generate, it's all about getting that clear picture of what's happening, getting the intel, the information that fuels every decision you make. Think of it as kind of the groundwork, right?
Yeah.
Whether it's planning a mission or maybe countering some enemy propaganda, you've got to have that solid foundation of information. It's really about understanding the battle space, understanding the enemy, even understanding the populations that you might be operating among.
So it's more than just, spying or intercepting messages.
It's about connecting the dots, turning
Yeah.
all that raw data that you gather into
Yeah.
something that you can actually use. And that involves a lot of different sources. We're talking traditional human intelligence all the way to open source information, stuff you can find on social media. It's like putting a puzzle together.
Okay, so generate is about getting the intel.
Yeah,
Preserve must be about keeping that intel safe, right?
you got it. Preserve is all about protecting your own information systems, your own narratives, your own story.
Okay.
We're talking about cybersecurity for sure, but it's also about fighting misinformation, ensuring that the information that your forces are relying on, that it's accurate.
So it's not just about, keeping secrets. It's about building trust in the information that's flowing through the ranks, making sure that everybody's on the same page.
You get it. If your Marines can't trust the information that they're getting, well, that can lead to hesitation, confusion, maybe even bad decisions on the battlefield with potentially really bad consequences.
Yeah, that makes sense. Protecting that information flow is just as important as protecting your physical assets.
I agree.
Okay? What about deny? That one seems pretty straightforward, right?
Yeah.
Keep the enemy from getting the info that they need.
Exactly. Deny is all about blocking the enemy's access to your information and disrupting their ability to use information against you. That includes obvious stuff like cyber attacks, jamming their communications. But it also includes those more traditional tactics like camouflage and deception, things that Marines have been doing for centuries.
So it works in both the digital and the physical world.
Absolutely. You're trying to deny the enemy the ability to target you, to figure out what you're planning to do, to exploit any weaknesses you might have.
Kind of like playing chess, right? You're not
Wow.
just trying to capture their pieces. You're trying to limit their options, to box them in.
That's a good way to think about it. And then finally, we've got project,
Okay.
which is all about getting your message out there, making
Yeah.
sure it's clear, making sure it's effective, and making sure it gets to the right people.
So it's more than just broadcasting a message. It's about tailoring it, making sure that it hits the right audience, that it resonates with them.
You got it. Projects can involve official communication channels, public affairs efforts, psychological operations, maybe even something as simple as a show of force, just to send a message. It's all about communicating your intent, shaping how people see you, and hopefully influencing the actions of both your allies and your enemies.
So these four functions,
Mhm.
generate, preserve, deny, and project. It sounds like they all kind of work together to achieve those three information advantages we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, it's like a system, right?
Right.
MCDP 8 makes it very clear that these functions aren't siloed off. They're all intertwined. They support each other.
Okay.
It's a very dynamic framework for using information to achieve your objectives in that crazy information environment.
It's like having a toolbox. You need every tool in there to do the job right.
Exactly.
Okay, so we got these four functions. We understand what they do. But how do we actually target the enemy with information? How do we take aim?
Well, MCDP 8 talks about two different approaches: cognitive targeting and functional targeting.
So cognitive targeting, that means going after their minds, right?
Right.
Trying to influence how they think.
You got it. It's about shaping how they see things, what they believe, and ultimately the decisions that they make. It really comes down to understanding how the enemy makes decisions and then figuring out how to use information to influence those decisions.
Interesting.
This might involve psychological operations, propaganda, disinformation campaigns.
So this is a very subtle form of warfare,
Right.
right? You're not destroying tanks or blowing up bridges. You're trying to mess with their heads.
And it can be incredibly effective, especially when you combine it with other forms of warfare.
Right.
Just imagine you're able to convince an enemy commander that his position is about to be overrun, even though it's not. You could make him retreat, you could make him surrender, or even make him make a really bad tactical mistake, all because of the information you fed him.
Wow, that's powerful. It's like a Jedi mind trick, right?
I like that.
You're using information to get them to act the way you want them to act.
Exactly. Now, functional targeting, on the other hand, that's a bit more direct.
So that's where we hit their systems.
Exactly. This is about disrupting their ability to communicate, to gather intel, to make decisions. Think about things like cyber attacks, jamming their radar, electronic warfare, basically anything that you can do to degrade or destroy their information systems.
So it's a more kinetic approach, right?
Yeah.
More like traditional warfare, taking out their stuff.
It can be, but even functional targeting, it can have those cognitive effects as well. You know, if you're able to disrupt the enemy's communication, that can lead to confusion, uncertainty, maybe even panic. And when that happens, they tend to make bad decisions, which can work in your favor.
So it's not just about, blowing stuff up. It's about understanding the psychological impact of those actions and using that to your advantage.
Exactly. And MCDP 8 encourages Marines to think about both of these angles, cognitive and functional, for every mission. It's all about asking the right questions. How can we use information to influence the enemy's thinking and degrade their ability to fight?
It's a 1-2 punch.
That's a good way to put it.
Now, earlier you mentioned deception as a way to deny the enemy information, right?
Right.
MCDP-8 seems to put a lot of emphasis on that, on deception.
Yeah, it really does. Deception, it's a fundamental tactic in warfare, always has been.
Right.
But it's even more important now in this information age, where information moves so quickly and can have such a big impact. MCDP 8, it actually breaks deception down into different levels.
Right.
Everything from tactical tricks all the way up to large-scale joint operations.
Interesting. So give me an example of how deception could actually work in this information age.
Okay, well, think about how you might use social media to create a false impression of where your unit is or what you guys are doing.
Okay.
You could post pictures that make it look like you're somewhere you're not. You could spread rumors in online forums.
So you're creating a fake narrative. It's like a disinformation campaign.
Exactly. The key is to be creative, to think outside the box,
Yeah.
and to always make sure that you're using deception in a way that supports your mission.
Deception, it's not just about lying. It's about really taking control of that information environment,
Right.
shaping it to your advantage.
Mhm.
Okay, this has been really helpful, breaking down that big picture of MCDP-8. But what does all of this actually mean for, the Marine on the ground, the guy out there on patrol?
Mm.
So we were just talking about how deception can be a really effective tool. We've covered a lot of ground here. Going from that core idea of information being a weapon all the way to these specific tactics like deception and those functions of information warfare. And it's really clear that every Marine out there, they're a potential information warrior.
Yeah.
It's not just the intel guys or the cyber specialists, right?
Right.
But the thing I keep coming back to is that technology, it changes so fast. How does the Marine Corps make sure that this doctrine, that MCDP-8, it stays relevant? That it doesn't get outdated?
That's a great question. And what makes MCDP 8 so valuable is that it's not just telling Marines what to think, it's teaching them how to think about this whole information environment. It gives them a framework that they can use to adapt to this constantly changing battle space.
So it's not just a rule book, right?
Yeah.
It's more like a set of principles that you can apply to any situation.
Exactly. And the document, it acknowledges that technology is going to change, tactics are going to evolve,
Right.
but those core principles of information warfare, like understanding how powerful a narrative can be, knowing how important it is that your force is resilient, how effective deception can be. Those things, those are always going to be relevant.
That makes sense. But the Marine Corps must be doing specific things to stay ahead of the curve, right? I mean, technology changes so fast.
Oh, absolutely. They're putting a lot of resources into new technologies.
Yeah.
Things like advanced cyber defenses, trying to protect our own systems,
Yeah.
AI-powered intelligence analysis, ways to sift through all that data and find what's important. Secure communications, making sure that we can talk to each other without the enemy listening in.
So keeping that tech edge sharp. But it's more than gadgets, isn't it?
It's way more than gadgets. MCDP 8, it also puts a big emphasis on training and education. It's about making sure that every Marine, every single one, understands how this information environment works. Being able to spot those threats, knowing how to use information effectively, whether we're talking about practicing good OPSCC or maybe contributing to that strategic narrative we talked about earlier.
So it's about building that information mindset,
Yes,
making it part of the Marine Corps DNA.
absolutely. And that's where leadership comes in. Leaders at every level, they've got to create that culture of information awareness.
Uh-huh.
They got to encourage their Marines to think critically, to be innovative, to be proactive out there in the information environment.
So it's not just about giving orders, it's about setting the example.
Right.
Showing your Marines that it's okay to question things, to think outside the box.
Think about it this way. The enemy, they're always coming up with new ways to attack us in this information environment.
Yeah.
They're trying to exploit our weaknesses.
Yeah.
We have to be just as innovative, just as quick to adapt if we want to stay ahead.
So it's like a constant arms race. But instead of bullets and bombs, it's bits and bytes.
Exactly. And MCDP 8, it lays out the roadmap for how we can win that race.
This deep dive into MCDP-8, it's been really incredible. I feel like we've all learned a ton about how the Marine Corps is adapting to these challenges in the information age. And it's clear to me that information warfare, it's not just some futuristic concept that we see in movies.
Yeah.
It's happening right now. It's something that every Marine needs to be ready for.
And remember, it's a battle space that goes beyond the physical world. It's out there in the digital domain. And every Marine has the potential to be a fighter in that domain.
That's what makes MCDP-8 so important. It's not just some document that sits on a shelf. It's a call to action for every Marine.
Yeah.
To be informed, to be adaptable, to be the most effective warrior they can be in this new age of warfare.
We encourage every Marine listening to grab a copy of MCDP 8, read it, study it. It's a fascinating read, and it's going to give you a lot of insights into how to thrive in this information age.
Keep learning, keep adapting, and stay frosty out there, Marines.